The tunnel smelled like rust and old sweat, and the particular kind of despair that gets into concrete after years of people sleeping against it. Dex had known that smell his whole life. It followed him the way debt follows a man, patient, indifferent, without malice. He came to Veth Station the way most people did, on a labor transit with no return seat booked, carrying 2 bags and a trade cert for tunnel boring operations, issued by a company that no longer existed. The recruiter at the Veth intake desk had scanned it without looking up. The machine beeped. She stamped his wrist with the colony ID band and told him the barracks were in Section 9, Sublevel 4, and that he'd start work the following cycle. He didn't ask what he'd be boring through. It was a mining colony. You bored through rock. That was what people did here. Section 9 wasn't a barracks so much as a corridor that had been given cots. The lighting was yellow and permanent, the kind with no dimmer, no cycle, no acknowledgement that human beings had evolved sleeping in darkness. Dex set his bags down on the only empty cot, which had someone else's initials scratched into the frame. He lay back, stared at the ceiling, and listened to the sounds of 12 other men and women in various states of sleep and wakefulness around him. A woman in the bunk across the aisle was reading something on a cracked tablet. She had a jaw like a cargo door and forearms that suggested she'd been doing physical labor since before Dex was born. She looked up at him without any particular warmth or hostility. "New bore-op?" she said. "Yeah. Section 14 shaft. They'll run you through the machinery in the morning. You know the Corivate system?" "Used to," he said. "On Heron's Ridge." She went back to her reading. "You'll pick it back up. It's the same machine everywhere, that's the point." Her name was Petra. He learned that later. He learned a lot of things later. The work was what he expected. The Corivate was heavier than the model he'd trained on, but the logic was identical. Set the alignment, lock the feed, let the bit eat, extract the core samples every 30 meters for the geology techs. He did it for 6 cycles without looking up. The rock was a dull gray-green basalt, laden with the trace mineral the Vethkai had been contracted to extract, which humans called scorite, and which apparently the wider galactic economy valued for reasons no one at Dex's pay grade had ever been clearly explained. The Vethkai were the administrators. That was the word everyone used. Administrators. They wore human faces and human clothes, and they spoke flawless standard, and they moved through the colony in small groups, tablets in hand, making notes. You saw them in the common corridors, in the processing facilities, in the intake offices. They were taller than average, slightly, and very still in a way that Dex initially chalked up to species difference. Some aliens were just less expressive. He'd worked alongside plenty of non-human species over the years. You learned not to project, but there was something. He couldn't name it for the first week. It itched at the back of his brain the way a sound at the edge of hearing itches. Not quite registering, never quite going away. He was eating in the common hall when one of them walked past his table. Standard Vethkai administrator in a gray coat, tablet raised, scrolling through something. The fluorescent overhead flickered once, just once, and in that flicker Dex saw the man's face go, wrong, blurred, like a bad signal, like a render that stuttered. Then the light steadied, and the man was just a man again. A little tall, a little still, walking between the tables toward the far corridor. Dex looked at his food. He ate it. He went back to the shaft. The thing he found, he didn't find it exactly. He was running cable reroutes in the sub-level maintenance maze, which was a task given to new bore ops on their off shift, because someone had to do it, and it didn't require seniority. And he came around a corner in maintenance tunnel J11. And nearly stepped on a man sitting with his back against the wall. The man was old, not old in a vague way, old in the specific way of someone who had survived something with the texture of it in his face. He was holding a piece of equipment in his lap that Dex didn't recognize. It looked like a pair of optical readers, the kind worn by workers who needed to interface directly with geological scanning feeds, but modified, rebuilt, almost. The frame was original colony issue, but everything inside it had been replaced with components Dex couldn't immediately identify. "You're the new bore-op," the old man said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," Dex said. He looked at the modified readers. "What is that?" "Something someone built. Someone who figured it out before most people." The old man turned the readers over in his hands. "You seen them glitch?" Dex stood very still. "Seen who glitch? You know who?" The old man looked up at him. His eyes were clear. That was the strange part. You expected the eyes of a man sitting in a maintenance tunnel talking about seeing things to be unsteady. His weren't. The administrators, you've seen one, in the light, when the signal dropped. Dex didn't say anything for a long moment. A pipe somewhere in the wall dripped. "What's wrong with the signal?" he finally said. "It's how they maintain the skin, the image, whatever the word is." The old man held up the readers. "These cut through it. I've been carrying them for 2 years. I keep meaning to." He stopped. "Set them down on the floor between them. Take them." "I'm not. I'm too old to do anything useful with them." "You're not." He stood up, which took effort, and tucked the tablet under his arm. "J11 connects to the water reclamation sub-basement. There's a door on the east wall that isn't on any schematic. Knock 3 times." He walked past Dex and down the corridor, and around the corner, and his footsteps faded. And then there was just the dripping pipe and the readers on the floor and the yellow light. Dex stood there for a while. Then he picked them up. He didn't put them on right away. He carried them back to his cot and lay there looking at the ceiling, with them resting on his chest, and thought about the kind of life a man leads when he starts seeing things that aren't there. And the kind of life a man leads when he starts seeing things that are. He put them on in the common corridor the next morning, on his way to the shift. He understood later why the old man had been carrying them for 2 years without acting. There's a cruelty in the sight that can't be unseen. It's not the specific horror of what you see. It's the retroactive horror. The understanding that you were walking blind through something real and enormous, and that the world you thought was one thing was another thing the whole time, with you in it, cooperative and oblivious. The administrators were not human. Under the optical readers, under the signal that Dex now understood was being broadcast from somewhere in the colony's infrastructure, woven into the lighting, into the comm systems, into the background hum of every frequented corridor, they were something else entirely. Something with too many joints in its fingers, and a secondary membrane over the eyes, and a stillness that wasn't cultural but biological, the stillness of a creature that didn't need to fake breathing. They moved through the colony in their borrowed skin, like people moving through a building they own. Which was, Dex supposed, the correct metaphor. He took the readers off before anyone saw him react. He put them on again in the processing bay, and looked at the screens and understood why he'd always felt a mild, sourceless pressure when he looked at them for too long. The screens said what they always said: work schedules, mineral quotas, colony efficiency metrics, the ordinary bureaucratic texture of a labor posting. But underneath, in a layer that only became visible when the optical readers filtered the broadcast signal, the screen said something else. Not in words exactly. In something older and more efficient than words. A continuous low-frequency instruction that Dex could feel in his teeth when he concentrated on it. Comply. Persist. Do not notice. You are content. You are sufficient. What you are doing is what you were made to do. He took the readers off. He walked to his station. He set his feed and locked his alignment and let the bit eat. His hands were steady. He was not a man prone to visible reaction. It was, he suspected, one of his less admirable qualities. That night he went to J11. The door on the east wall of the water reclamation sub-basement was exactly where the old man said it would be. It was the color of the wall. Someone had painted it deliberately, matching the concrete with enough precision that you'd have to be looking for it to find it. He knocked 3 times. The woman who answered was younger than he expected. Late 20s maybe, with a shaved head grown out to about 2 centimeters, and the particular wariness of someone who has been watching doors for a long time. She looked at him. Then she looked at the readers in his hand. "He finally gave them to someone," she said. "Not a question." "Yeah." She stepped back. "Come in." There were 9 people in the room. Petra was one of them, which surprised him less than it probably should have. She was sitting on a crate with her arms crossed, and when Dex came in she gave him the same look she'd given him in the barracks. No warmth, no hostility, just assessment. "The Borop from Heron's Ridge," she said. "That's all I know about me too," he said. Someone laughed. The tension in the room dropped a degree. The woman with the shaved head was named Oria. She'd been an infrastructure tech on Veth Station for 7 years. She had a habit of speaking with her hands pressed flat on whatever surface was nearest. A table, a wall, as if she needed the contact to organize her thoughts. She explained what she knew, which was a great deal more than Dex, and she did it without theatrics, which he appreciated. The Vethkai were not a military occupation. That was the first thing to understand, and it was the thing that made it complicated. There were no soldiers, no visible weapons, no overt coercion beyond the signal. They didn't need those things. They had discovered early in their expansion phase that a labor population kept gently anesthetized with continuous low-frequency compliance messaging was more productive than a subjugated one. You got better yield, less attrition, lower maintenance costs. The humans on station weren't slaves in any legally actionable sense. They were just slightly flatter than they should be, slightly less curious, slightly more willing to accept the quota and the cot and the yellow light and the shift and the next shift and the shift after that as the complete and sufficient shape of a life. The signal comes from the broadcast hub, Oria said. Her hands were on the table, sub-level 7. It's integrated into the colony's primary comm array. Shut down the array, the signal drops. What happens when the signal drops? Dex asked. People see the administrators as they actually are. And then? Oria's jaw shifted. We don't know. We've never managed to get that far. There was a silence in the room, the kind of silence that has weight. How many Vethkai are there in the colony? Dex said. About 60. Spread through administration, processing oversight and security. A pause. Their security is not human. No. Dex thought about the two he'd seen in the processing bay. The way they moved when they were off signal. Fluid in a way that looked rehearsed. Like something mimicking ease rather than feeling it. I figured. The broadcast hub is accessed through a maintenance corridor off the primary water processing junction. It's guarded, not by humans. Oria looked at him. The readers let you see them as they are. They don't make you bulletproof. I know what they don't do, Dex said. He went back to his cot and lay there for a long time. He wasn't afraid, or rather he was afraid. In the ordinary way a sane person is afraid of dying, but the fear was just a weight in his chest, not a paralysis. He kept thinking about Heron's Ridge. The mine there had collapsed in the 3rd year of operation. Not a catastrophic failure. A slow one. The kind that comes from systematically ignored stress fractures in the primary support arch. He'd flagged it twice in reports. Nothing had changed. He'd left 3 months before it went, and 72 people hadn't. That was the thing about certain kinds of systems. They didn't need malice. They just needed everyone to agree that noticing things was someone else's job. The next shift he worked normally. He ran his feeds and pulled his cores and ate his food in the common hall, and said the things a person says when they're functioning within the expected parameters of their life. He watched the administrators. He watched the way the colony moved around them. People stepping slightly aside. Conversations quieting slightly when they passed. The subterranean deference of people who don't know they're deferring. The signal was always on. He could feel it now that he knew what to feel for. A faint insistence at the base of the skull. Not painful, not even unpleasant, just relentlessly present. He ate lunch across from a man named Call, who'd been at Veth Station for 11 years. Call talked about his family on Meridian, a wife and 2 kids, and how he was saving for a transit home. He'd been saving for 9 years. He talked about it with the easy warmth of someone who has been looking forward to something for so long that the looking forward has become the comfortable thing, not the thing itself. Dex listened and ate, and didn't say anything to unsafe frequencies or maintenance corridors, or what he'd seen when he put the readers on. He went to J11 that night and told Oria he'd do it. There was a man named Sev who became the complication. Dex had expected the complication to be logistics, or security patterns, or the problem of getting 9 people and 1 pair of optical readers into a guarded corridor on sublevel 7. He had not expected it to be Sev. Sev was a geology tech, mid-40s, with the nervous precision of someone who'd spent years calibrating sensitive equipment. He'd been in Oria's group for 4 months. He'd seen the signal. He'd looked through the readers and seen what the administrators were. And then, he'd put the readers down and made a decision that Dex only saw when Sev sat across from him in the sub-basement and explained it with the terrible calm of a man who has accepted what he is. I have children, Sev said. On Callaway Station, I send money back every cycle. If I do this and it goes wrong, if you do nothing, Dex said, they grow up in this, you don't know that. 9 years, Dex said. That man in the common hall, Call, saving for 9 years to go home. The signal keeps you comfortable enough not to go. You think that's a coincidence? That's not. That's a man who's scared to go home and finds reasons to stay. People do that without alien signals. They do. But right now there's a machine in sublevel 7 that's deciding which thoughts he keeps and which ones get smoothed out. And you want to leave that running because it's comfortable. Dex leaned forward. I'm not asking you to be brave. I'm asking you to be inconvenienced. Sev looked at his hands. A long time passed. Dex didn't speak. He'd learned somewhere in the accumulated years of working beside men in small spaces that some silences need to be left alone. What do you need from me? Sev finally said. Shift patterns for the sublevels junction. You pulled geological surveys down there last quarter. Sev was quiet again, then he reached into his jacket. What followed was 3 days of the particular hell of planning something that has to work on the first try. The Vethkai security on Sublevel 7 were not the soft-skinned administrators in gray coats. They were something else from the same species. Aurea called them the shareholder class, which was the closest translation. A distinction in the Vethkai hierarchy that Dex didn't fully understand and suspected he didn't need to. What he needed to understand was that there were 4 of them stationed in a rotating pattern, armed with weapons that had been catalogued through careful observation from the maintenance corridor above. 9 people. 1 pair of readers which had to be worn to navigate the signal-hazed corridors of Sublevel 7 accurately. A plan that required 3 of them to be somewhere specific at a time determined by the shift rotation, which changed on a frequency that Sev had reverse-engineered from 6 weeks of geological survey access logs, which was the kind of detail that would have seemed absurdly small before, and which now seemed like the foundation of everything. On the morning of the 4th day, Dex sat in J11 with his back against the wall and the readers on his knee and thought about nothing in particular, which was, he'd found, the only way to think about things that mattered. Petra sat down next to him. She didn't say anything for a while. Heron's Ridge, she said eventually. What was that like? Rocky, he said. Same as here. I mean the collapse, he looked at her. I wasn't there for the collapse. No. She was quiet. Is that why you're here? For the ones who were? He thought about it, honestly. I'm here because I put on the glasses, he said. And then I couldn't see anything else. She nodded slowly. Like that made sense to her in some particular way. She had a flask. Actual alcohol, which was hard to come by on Veth Station, and which she hadn't gotten through legitimate channels. And she held it out to him without ceremony. He took it and drank, and handed it back. She drank and put it away. My mother used to hum when she was working on something difficult, she said. Like a kettle coming to boil. We'd know the job was bad by how loud it got. Mine did the same thing, Dex said. Different tune. Doesn't matter the tune, Petra said. She stood up and dusted her hands on her trousers. Let's go. The corridor to Sublevel 7 was 40 meters long and lit by the same yellow permanence as everything else on Veth Station. They went in 2 groups, Aurea and 3 others first, through the maintenance access to draw the rotation. Then Dex and Petra and Sev through the main corridor. Time to the 6-minute gap that Sev's spreadsheet had identified with the obsessive precision of a man who'd decided that if he was going to do this, he was going to do it right. Dex had the readers on. The corridor looked the same as any other corridor on the station. Then they rounded the corner to the secondary junction, and the Vethkai guard was there. Not in its administrative skin, because in the lower levels the signal was tighter. Focused inward, not outward, and it didn't bother maintaining appearances for empty corridors. And Dex saw it as it was for the first time, without the glass and concrete between them. It was tall. That was the first thing. 7 feet, easy, with the proportions of something that had evolved reaching. Long limbs and a narrow chest and fingers that split into 3.5 rather than 5. The secondary eye membrane was down, which meant it hadn't spotted them yet. The membrane, Aurea had explained, was a sensitivity filter. Down meant relaxed, unalert. Its skin was translucent in a specific banded way. Like the rings of an old tree visible through new wood. It saw them. Dex had a long bar wrench in his right hand. It was the most useful object in the maintenance kit. He swung it with the full rotation of his shoulder and caught the guard's wrist before its arm had completed its reach toward the weapon on its belt. The crunch was different from what he expected. Not bone break different. Denser than that, ceramic dense. And the guard made a sound that was entirely unlike anything a human would make. High, modulated, patterned. An alarm sound maybe, or pain. He didn't wait to learn which. Petra was already past him. She moved with an efficiency that Dex recognized as someone who had also been thinking about this for 3 days and had concluded that speed was the only variable she could control. Sif came last, very pale, carrying the secondary toolkit that contained the components Aurea had spent a week assembling. The broadcast hub was a room that looked like an engine room, and mostly was. Veth Station's communications array occupied one wall, the legitimate array, carrier frequencies and relay hardware, and the environmental monitoring systems. The other wall was the other array. It didn't look different, which was the point. Same rack-mounted hardware, same cable bundles, same status lights, blinking in the same indifferent rhythms. But the frequencies it was running were not on any documented spectrum, and the signal it was broadcasting was not technically a communication. Aurea was already there, with 2 of her people. The other guard was on the floor. She had a cut above her eyebrow and her hands were steady. "Clock," Dex said. "We have 4 minutes before the rotation completes." He handed Sev the readers. Sev put them on, which he'd argued against and been overruled on, and looked at the second array with the optical filter, showing him the signal in full. A visible thing through the readers, Oria had explained. A shimmer pattern that you could trace back to its source point the way you trace a sound to its origin. Seve's hands moved over the hardware with the same nervous precision he brought to geological sensors. He found the source array in 20 seconds, pulled the main feed. Nothing happened. "Secondary junction," he said. "There's a backup. They designed it redundant." "Of course they did," Petra said. 3 minutes, Oria said. Sev pulled a secondary panel. The tools he needed were in the kit he'd carried down. He worked in silence except for his breathing, which was fast but controlled, and Dex stood at the door with the bar wrench and thought about the mine at Heron's Ridge, and the 2 reports that nobody read, and the 72 people and the way Call talked about his kids, with the settled patience of a man who has quietly accepted not going home as the texture of his life. "Got it," Sev said. "Will it hold?" Sev looked at his work. "It'll blow the entire secondary array. The backup too. They'll need to rebuild it from imported components." He paused. "I don't know what that does to their maintenance costs, but I'm guessing it makes this station a net loss." Another pause. "I'm also guessing it means they won't like us very much." "We passed that point," Dex said. 2 minutes, Oria said. He had wanted to give Sev something to say. Some version of the deadpan line that occurs to a person in moments like this, the one that gets remembered. He'd thought about it in the small hours. But the truth was that when the moment arrived, he was just a man with a wrench in a corridor, which was all he'd ever been, and the thing he felt wasn't heroic and wasn't cinematic. It was simpler than that. It was the feeling of a man who has walked past a structural fracture twice and is finally, extremely late, doing the thing he should have done before. "Do it," he said. The secondary array went with a sound like a transformer blowing. No fire, no drama, just a deep concussive pop and then the smell of burned insulation and then silence. The status lights on the second rack went dark in a cascade from left to right. And then, faintly, and then not faintly at all, the sounds from the corridor changed. There were voices. Not words exactly, not at first. The sound that a group of people makes when the thing they'd accepted as the whole shape of reality cracks open and something else shows through. A collection of individual realizations arriving at different speeds in different people. Some fast and sharp, and some slow and wondering. Then the words came. Questions, mostly. And not the kind of questions a person asks when they want an answer, and not the kind they ask when they're frightened. The kind of questions that come out of a human being when, after a very long time, something in them wakes up. The 60 Vethkai administrators in Veth Station all became visible as themselves simultaneously. Dex was in the corridor when it happened, when the signal dropped completely, and the projection layer that sat over every administrator in the colony vanished in the same instant. He saw the faces of the colony workers changing, not to fear, though there was fear, not to rage, though there was rage, mostly to something more complicated. The expression of a person who has been told a lie, not in words but in the structure of their days, and who is now doing the long math of what it cost them. The first Vethkai security response arrived 8 minutes later. It was fast and organized, and it was not enough. Not because of Dex or Petra or Oria or the 9 people from the subbasement. Because of the 3,000 workers on Veth Station who had just looked at the people managing their labor and their lives and their quotas and their cots, and who were doing the same math Dex had done, which was, they die like we do, and there are more of us. He was in the main corridor when the second wave of Vethkai security came through. He was by himself by then, separated from the others in the chaos of the preceding 40 minutes, which had been the kind of 40 minutes that doesn't organize itself into a coherent narrative until much later, if ever. He had the bar wrench, and he had the readers, and he had a cut across his forearm from a weapon he hadn't fully understood, and a ringing in his left ear that he suspected was permanent. The security team, 4 of them, secondary membranes up, weapons raised, stopped when they saw him. He was one man, alone in a corridor that had other corridors branching off it in 3 directions. And down each of those corridors was the sound of Veth Station's labor population doing something that had no precise name in any species language, but which translated, roughly as, "We have decided to stop." The lead Vethkai made a sound that he was beginning to understand as the equivalent of an address statement. The translator beat in his ear, "Standard colony issue, produced the device. Where is the device? Dex looked at the readers in his hand, then at the four of them, then at the bar wrench. You know, he said, I came here to bore a tunnel and mind my own business. He turned the readers over in his hand. Then I put these on. He looked up at them. Turns out you can see a lot of things you'd rather not see. You just can't unsee them after. He put the readers in his jacket pocket. It wasn't a gesture of defiance, he just needed both hands. What happened in Veth Station over the following cycles was not clean, and was not simple, and did not resolve itself into the shape that stories prefer. 3 workers died, 11 were injured. 7 Vethkai administrators were held in what the colony workers improvised as a detention area, while communications were sent to the nearest human jurisdiction authority, which was 42 hours away at best relay speed. The Vethkai security team retreated when it became clear that the arithmetic of the situation had changed irrevocably. 60 beings against 3,000 who were no longer dampened into compliance is a different equation than 6 against 3,000 who don't know what they should want. There were negotiations eventually. There were authorities eventually. There was a lot of documentation and a lot of debriefing and a lot of difficult conversations about jurisdiction and species sovereignty and the legal status of a compliant signal broadcast without consent, which turned out to be an area of galactic law that was substantially underdeveloped. Dex gave his statement to 4 different parties on 3 different occasions, and each time he said essentially the same things in different orders. And each time someone in a uniform or a suit made notes and looked at him with the expression of a person trying to place something in a category and finding the category insufficient. He found Call on the 2nd day, in the common hall, which had become a kind of informal gathering point, because people needed to be near each other, and the common hall had tables. Call was sitting with his hands around a cup of something that had gone cold. He looked like a man who had been awake for a long time and had given up expecting to sleep. I kept thinking, Call said, without preamble, that I needed to sort out the transport costs. For going home, that was the thing, transport costs. I had the money. I've had the money for 3 years. I just kept thinking there was something I needed to sort out first. Dex sat down across from him. He didn't say anything. My daughter turned 8 last month, Call said. I sent a message. I watched the reply 6 times. He stared at the cold cup. I don't know what was them and what was me, whether I was staying because of the signal or because I'm the kind of person who stays. I don't know how to tell the difference. I don't think you have to tell the difference today, Dex said. Call looked up at him. When does the next transit leave? 47 hours, Dex said. He'd checked for reasons he hadn't entirely examined. There are seats, Call nodded. He picked up the cold cup and drank from it anyway, with the expression of a man who has decided to stop waiting for things to be ready. Dex sat there after Call left. The common hall filled and emptied and filled again. People moved through it with the particular energy of human beings who have been under a low ceiling for a long time and have just discovered the ceiling was lower than they thought and are now straightening to their full height, which takes a while, because it involves remembering what full height feels like. Petra found him eventually. She sat down and put the flask on the table between them without comment. He drank. She drank. The hall was loud with voices. You're not leaving, she said. It wasn't a question. Not yet. There'll be a reconstruction team, infrastructure. They'll need bore-ops. Yeah, she picked up the flask. Same rate of pay? Probably better, he said. Nobody staying voluntarily anymore. She laughed, which was the first time he'd heard her laugh. It was the laugh of someone who found the world consistently absurd and had made a private peace with this. He had the readers in his jacket pocket. He'd thought more than once about what it meant to carry them. The man in the maintenance tunnel had carried them for 2 years and done nothing, and Dex had been tempted, more than once, to locate a judgment in that fact. He'd resisted the temptation. A man keeps a tool in his pocket for 2 years because he can't find the right person to give it to. Then he finds the right person. It doesn't make him a coward for the years before. It makes him a man who was waiting. He put his hand in his pocket and felt the frame of them. The optical filter that cut through the frequency and showed you what was there. The world as it was, in its black and white, signal-stripped reality, stripped of the comfortable layer. He pulled them out and set them on the table, just sitting there. The modified frames, the salvaged components, the things someone had built in a maintenance tunnel with patience and grief, and whatever the word is for the love of a thing being true. What happens to those, Petra said. I don't know, he said. Someone should figure out how to make more. She picked them up and turned them over in her hands the way the old man had, with the same unsentimental appraisal. Then she set them back down between them. Outside the common hall, outside the station, on the tidally locked moon's permanent dark side, where Veth Station squatted against the black, the rock continued to be what it had always been. Indifferent, ancient, full of the particular mineral that mattered to someone somewhere in an economy that spanned more species than Dex could name. The shafts were still there. The machinery was still there. The work that people came here to do was still there. But the signal was gone. And without it, the yellow light was just light. And the shift was just a shift. And the cot was just a cot. And the distance between a man and his family was just distance. Real and grievous. And, for the first time in a long time on Veth Station, something that people were actually doing the math on. Dex drank the last of the flask. The hall was loud. Somewhere, across it, someone was laughing at something that had evidently been funny enough to spread. And laughter was moving from table to table, the way laughter does when people are feeling the specific relief of permission. Permission to find things funny again. Permission to want things. Permission to be the size they actually were. He didn't know what came after this. That was the honest answer. The law was complicated, and the politics were complicated, and the economics were more complicated still. And there were people in more important rooms than a common hall on a mining moon who would make decisions about those things. And some of those decisions would be wrong, and some of them would take a very long time, and some of the people who deserved things wouldn't get them in time. But the signal was gone, and in the absence of the signal, 3,000 people were having the specific, irreducible human experience of seeing clearly, which is not comfortable, and is not easy, and does not resolve itself into clean shapes. It just means you're seeing, which is in the end the only tool any of them had ever had. The only thing that had never required a signal to run. He put the readers back in his pocket. He went to find out when the next shift started.